Happy Wednesday, AP Bio folks. Before you start working today, I just want to go over a few important resources and point out some things that I think will be helpful to you as you continue writing labs and FRQs. Labs and FRQs are actually really similar. FRQs often ask you to describe experiments or analyze data, kind of the same types of skills that we work on when we're doing labs. So on the screen, hopefully this looks familiar. This is what is in the classwork section of your Google Classroom. And I just want to highlight a couple of the class materials posted here. Hopefully you're aware that you have access to all of the notes and everything from each unit that we do. The equations and formula sheet is here as well. You will actually want to have this open when you work on your assessment today. Now that we're getting to a little more math, you are always allowed to have this equations and formula sheet with you, or a printed copy of it, as long as you didn't take any notes on it, with you when you're taking your assessments. The ones I wanted to highlight today, though, are a couple of things. After grading the photosynthesis labs this past week, I wanted to point out a few resources that are in here to help you with labs particularly. So there's a topic here called lab write-up resources. And if you look under here, it's got a few different things. Two of these are just little graphics that help explain the idea of claim evidence reasoning, which we use a lot in AP Bio, and you can zoom in on this to read what it says, but it kind of explains what each of those pieces means and kind of what you should be including. So if you're ever not quite sure, you can always look back at those to help you explain that. There's also one here called Writing Figure Legends, and I want to look at this one just briefly because the figure legend was a part where a lot of people lost points on the photosynthesis lab, and today your transpiration lab is also due, which also involves graphs that should have figure legends. So a figure legend is how we title a graph or a chart in a written document. We don't actually put titles on graphs if they're part of a written document like a lab report. The only time you put a title on a graph is if it's in a presentation, like a slideshow or something, which we don't really do in this class. So every time you have a data table or a graph, it's going to need a figure legend. So this document that we're looking at now has some examples. When you look at these examples, I don't expect you to understand all the language or write exactly like this, but it's just to give you an idea of what types of information and how detailed these should be and kind of what they look like. These were taken out of actual scientific papers. So the front side, the first page of this document looks at figure legends written on graphs of different types. So a couple things. First of all, you'll notice the figure legend is located underneath the graph, because normally when we look at a graph, we often read it from the bottom up. So we'll look at this bottom example. It's a little more maybe like a graph that you would make. When you're reading a graph, the first thing that you need to look at is you need to read what's on the X and Y axis. So since our eyes kind of naturally go to the bottom of the graph first, we put the figure legend below. Notice it gives the figure a number. You usually go in order. So if you only have one graph, you'd call it figure 1. But if you have multiple graphs or charts, you would number them in order. And then it's very descriptive. This is a very complete sentence that explains the data that's shown in this graph, explaining what the error bars represent and all of that. So I should be able to get kind of a summary of the experiment just by reading the figure legend. So that's how you write a figure legend for a graph. We do something similar for a data table, which you'll need in future labs that we do. The only difference is for a data table, the figure legend goes on the top, because for a data table, we start reading at the top. You start by reading the headings and then look down. Again, you can see the figure legend is a sentence or two kind of summarizing what all of this data is and what it means. So you can always refer back to this document if you need to look at some examples of what figure legends should look like. The other place that you can go for help on even writing lab write-ups, but also FRQs, is there's another post on here called FRQ Guidelines and Tips. And if we open this document on the right, It has a whole bunch of information that's really helpful when answering free response questions. Some of it is just kind of technical stuff we'll talk more about when we get closer to the exam. But the ones I wanted to point out right now, like I said, a lot of FRQs ask you to design or describe an experiment. So this also helps you when you're working on labs in this class because it kind of has a checklist of all the things you need to include: your independent variable and dependent, your control and experimental groups, and variables to be held constant. Every time you're asked to design an experiment, whether it's for a lab report or an FRQ, you should include those pieces. It also gives you some things that I will be looking for every time that you make a graph. So again, before you turn in today's transpiration lab, double check and make sure that it kind of meets all of these criteria, because those are the types of things that I look for when I grade your labs as well as your FRQs. Let me see. There's another document on here called the FRQ command terms. You've probably started to notice some of these kind of the action words in FRQs. This is a good document just for a kind of a quick reference. These are some of the most common and there are more. And it tells you a little bit about what that means. These also are kind of a clue as to how many points that section will be worth. Something that just says to identify something is probably just a 1-point question. It literally just wants you to say what it is. But if it asks you to justify, explain, elaborate, discuss, those are questions that are going to require a little more lengthy answer. So you have all those documents in here as resources for you. Please look at those and use them throughout the year this year to continue improving your lab write-ups and your free response answers. Speaking of free response, the last thing that I wanted to talk about real quickly is your free response, particularly the free response parts of your assessment today. So a couple of things before you go to the assessment today in College Board, make sure you read the post in Google Classroom. As I mentioned last week, I will start telling you how many points each FRQ is worth. That will also help you figure out how much detail you need to include. Have the equations and formula sheet open or have a printed copy nearby so you can reference that if necessary. One of the FRQs this week asks you to draw a graph and explain what you drew. So have a piece of paper ready as well. You actually always have the option to handwrite FRQ answers if you'd prefer, and you can take a photo and upload that photo to the College Board assessment and submit your answer that way. And the last thing, just so we can start thinking about it, we'll get into this more the further we go through, but you should be starting to think a little bit about pacing. If this was the actual AP exam and you were given this many questions, the assessment you're taking today probably should take you about half an hour. So you do not have to quit after half an hour, but pay attention and just kind of time yourself. If you're spending 60 minutes on this, then you're going to need to start working on ways and strategies to speed up your the time it takes you to respond to the multiple choice and free response questions. So like I said, we'll keep talking about that more, but I'll start just giving you kind of a general guideline so that you have an idea how you're doing. Good luck with all your work today. I will be available on a Google Meet at 1:30 this afternoon. If you have any questions, the link is in the Google Classroom post, and I hope you have a great day.